Hello and welcome along to another episode of the Tackling Sport podcast. And it's Daniel here this week, and we're going to try and continue again our interview series. And joining me, I'm delighted to say, is Caradh O'Donovan. Caradh is a former kickboxer and Irish karate star, also the founder of Global Athlete, presenter of iScore and iRadio, and ambassador for Equity Sports. So, Caradh, I covered a lot of it there, but still a lot more to cover. But welcome to the podcast, Caradh. Thanks a million for coming on.
Thanks a million for having me. Delighted.
Yeah, Caradh, listen, I suppose maybe to start with the kickboxing, how did you get involved in that? I understand you took it up maybe at the age of 12, was it?
Yeah, it was really random, like how I started. I loved like all sports, but I wanted to play football, but like I'm from Sligo, kind of Sligo town, and there wasn't really anywhere for girls to play football. I'm showing my age now, like that was a long time ago. And then I don't know what gave me the notion to start kickboxing, but there was somebody in my class doing it. And I just thought, well, look, I'm going to chance it. And I ended up down in this like manky, dirty, like kickboxing gym underneath the church. And I just did one class and then they couldn't get rid of me after that. So that's how I started. My mother was devastated.
And then talk me through the early stages. Then when did it become from like something you would just enjoy doing to something that you actually got really good at then?
Yeah, so like I started training and just like I loved it straight away, but I kind of got a bit of help. The fact there was very few girls doing it when I started, it meant like I was the best girl straight away because I was probably the only one. But then even going to like regional competitions and national competitions, I won pretty much from the start. So I was winning kind of national level competitions within a few months. And like I wasn't that good. Like looking back, I wasn't, but I thought it was deadly because I was winning everything. So when you get that bit of confidence, then you think, oh, I'm really good at this. I'm going to keep going. And that's kind of how I just kind of, I guess, stuck with it because it just gave me the confidence to think I was brilliant. But looking back, I was probably rubbish. But anyway.
And then when did it become like, because I understand then you went into karate. When did like the Olympics become on the radar then? Was that like much later on in terms of an ambition of yours initially?
So yeah, the Olympics is a strange one because I'd say the Olympics has been in my mind since I was about 4 or 5. Like I used to I suppose like everybody, I used to watch it on the TV and they just, the stuff they show you, like when you're actually watching the games and then you're watching all the like, I guess the highlights of it all, and it just looks like the best thing ever. And they're like, it's just like my life's going to be amazing once I get to the Olympics. So that's when it started. And when I started playing or started doing kickboxing, I didn't understand that like kickboxing's not in the Olympics and that you have to do all this kind of, there's all the politics involved in getting your sport in. I just thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to go to the Olympics with kickboxing. And it wasn't until I got older that it dawned on me like, this isn't going to happen in this sport. It takes decades, if not years, to get your sport in. And there's just so many hoops that sports have to go through to do it. So it was always at the back of my mind. But then I just saw karate got in for Japan. And I just thought, well, look, they're not that different, the sports. I'll give it a go and see what happens. And that was when it became, I guess, a bit more serious, the whole Olympic thing.
Yeah. So you were like kickboxing for a long period of time, obviously competing at a great level. And then you decided to make that transition to karate then. Like, what are the differences between the two sports for those that might be unaware of the small differences between the two?
So, like, yeah, so the first thing I guess I'd say is that the type of kickboxing I did is somewhat similar to karate because I did a type of kickboxing called point fighting. So it's not like the kickboxing you see in the ring where they're like continuously just hitting each other. It's very much stop start and it's like the first person to score and then you get awarded a point and the fight kind of restarts. So from that point of view, the two sports are similar. They both take place on like a matted area. They're all like squares, I guess, and they're like 8 meters by 8 meters. It's like a chessboard. But okay. Obviously, so it's like kind of, I always compare the two of them as like chess, but like aggressive chess because it's very tactical, but obviously you're kicking and punching each other. But yeah, the difference between the sports, the biggest one was kickboxing's full contact and karate is not. So I obviously got a lot of warnings at the start for hitting too hard and you can get disqualified pretty quickly, like if you keep hitting people too hard. So that was a big adjustment. And then it's just, I guess karate is more technical, kickboxing is slightly faster. But the technical side was the difficult one because you could be punching somebody and you won't get a score for it because you haven't like pulled your hand back in the correct way, or like they're just so fussy about what a score is and what it isn't. And I'm still like, after a few years doing the sport, I'm still not even like 100% what they're looking for. I just think they're moody. The karate judges are just in, like, you have to be in the mood to give you a score, basically. So yeah, that's probably making a really bad job of explaining it for people. But there's not like a massive amount of difference. But the biggest one will be contact, and then the second one will be just the different types of techniques, I guess.
So you've got to learn to be a lot more technical doing the sport, the karate, as opposed to kickboxing, where there's probably less thinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, probably. Yeah, I think I did have to kind of relearn techniques. And that was probably the hardest thing, like, because you know, you're used to throwing a punch or a kick the same way for like 20 years, and then you just have to slightly change like the force that you put behind it, and then the retraction of the technique. And I'm getting really into now the like details of it, which is a bit boring, but yeah, just, I guess that's it, like just more technical, and yeah, and just takes a while to adjust, I guess.
Yeah, so you did all this then to maybe have a journey towards Tokyo 2020, and obviously that was cancelled last year. Tell us maybe the build up to that first, initially in training for it, and then maybe like obviously when it was announced that it was going to be postponed for a year, how that kind of affected things for you.
Since the time I started, karate has been just like, you couldn't make up the amount of stuff that happened like in the world of karate. So the first kind of bit was, there was a massive governance dispute in the sport here in Ireland. And like athletes were being blackmailed to pick these organizations to decide which governing body they want to work with. So I had to like get a campaign going and try and like get the IOC involved and the World Federation involved, just to even get selected for a team for European Championships, which was like probably the hardest battle to fight just to get on the Irish team we've ever had. It was harder than any like actual physical fight. So that was the first part of it. And so then we so that was for an Olympic qualification event, and we were trying to collect ranking points. So the build up to it was a bit mad, because we were so focused on trying to get just to get selected and get all the politics out of the way that you almost forget that you have to focus on performance. And then I had 3 surgeries on my leg, which was a nightmare. So the first one was pretty bad. I had to get a knee operation, an ankle operation. Then the ankle operation didn't work, and I had to get another one. And so as soon as I got through all of that, then the pandemic hit, and then they were postponed a year. So actually the postponement worked out quite well for me initially, because as much as every athlete said this, they was like, it gave them an extra year to prepare. Like, it genuinely gave me an extra year to prepare, because I could barely walk like March 2020, never mind like properly compete. So yeah, that was the build up to it. And then the cancellation or the postponement was, it was probably like a relief. It was a no-brainer, really. It was going to happen anyway. And then I don't even know where I'm going to. And then I've retired since that, because just like, a number of reasons anyway.
Yeah, just talk maybe a little bit about that politics, I guess, an issue when you started in karate. So it obviously feels like there's a lot off-field stuff happening in the sport before you even get into kind of trying to qualify for Olympics and stuff.
Yeah, there was loads. And you know something, right? This is like, I've competed in kickboxing and karate, and I've worked in 2 other sports, and this is something that I witnessed in every single sport. But you just don't always hear about it. And so when I was in kickboxing, there was always like politics going on. Athletes were always used as pawns for people in positions of power to get what they want, because they're great leverage. And without athletes, don't really have anything. So when I switched sports, it was just a deal I made with myself. I was like, if this stuff comes up again, I'm just not taking it. Like, I'm just not going to put up with this rubbish. I'm standing up for myself. And of course, like, I was in the sport like 6 months, and it all kicked off. So that was why I became quite vocal about it, and I did something about it. I had been given a really straightforward, like, I've been given an option, because I was looking for the middleweight, like the minus 61 kilo category. There wasn't many people challenging for that at that point. And the other so the governance dispute was 2 people claiming to be the president, and 2 governing bodies set up. and one had the mandate for the World Federation, and then the other were recognised by Sport Ireland. So the Sport Ireland recognised one was the real one, but the World Federations has a kind of colourful past around their governance, and they were recognising their mates. And so if I wanted to go to the Olympics, I had to compete with them. And so the old me might have considered just looking after myself and just, well, I can just go and affiliate with this guy or these guys here and screw all the other athletes. So I had made a deal with myself I wasn't going to do that. So that's why I had to stand up with the whole, and it wasn't just me, there was loads of us. We started a campaign then just to get the World Federation involved and get the Olympics involved, and the Olympic Federation of Ireland helped us out as well. So it was, I don't know if I'm even explaining that right. So stop me if I'm rambling here.
No, I was kind of, when you're talking, I was thinking of other sports and, you know, like splits in sports, like on a lesser scale, like the darts, but even boxing, there's so many different belts. And it's just for someone looking outside, it's karate, for example, you're like, why can't it just be one? And why can't everyone just like get along? But obviously it sounds like, so there's two different kind of organizations really, one recognized by Sport Ireland, like you said, and one by the World Federation. And then you kind of athletes are like caught in the middle and you don't really know which way to turn or who to compete with, basically.
Yeah, that's what happened. And originally they were all one. But they just couldn't sort it out amongst themselves. They just were like throwing all the toys out of the pram. A lot of them, really, that was what it came down to. And they were like, no, I'm in charge. No, I'm in charge. Well, and then we're going to just try and get, if all the athletes come with us, then we'll really be in charge. So that's pretty much how it went down. But that happens. It happens all the time. They're so immature, some of the sports leadership and the sports administrators. Not all of them, like some of them are great, but it happens all the time. It splits off. People can't work together, and it usually comes down to the athletes are put in the middle. And and usually if you stand up, like I was the most hated person in karate for doing this, by the way. You know, this wasn't easy. I got absolutely trolled online by like people that were in the sport. They're like absolutely not easy thing to do.
What were they saying, or what was the kind of like when people were trolling you online?
So like first of all, when I'd like have a bad result, like all of these saddos were like, I think I had a suspected broken wrist in one competition and they're all delighted. So they're basically all just like saying, oh, you know, she's injured. That's great. But then there was worse stuff, like people that were judges or referees in the sport accused me of taking bribes to tell lies. I think I was paid $5,000 for an interview I did once. I was like, I wish like I did not get any money for that. Like the stuff that was going around was just, and these are for people that are going to be judging me then at the national championships. So that's a job against, like, it's crazy.
Jeez. And then talk to me a little bit then about qualifying for the Olympics. Or how did that work initially? In terms of, did you have to go through like a qualifying events to qualify, or how does it work to get on the Irish team to initially go for Tokyo, basically?
So there was two options originally, and the first one was through your world ranking, but because I was so new to the sport, my ranking was going to take time to build, and they started off the qualification pathway where like you could only get into these ranking events if you had a ranking of top. I think it was top 60 or top 80. So straight away put me out because I was new into the sport and I couldn't there was no wildcard entries or anything like that, or there was no like adjustments made for athletes coming in from different sports. So that was one option. And then between the injury as well, there was just no way my ranking was going to get into the top 4 in the world for the qualification for that way. So the other option was a qualification event, which is still due to happen. It's supposed to happen in Paris next month. And the criteria for that would be that, first of all, I have to get selected on the Irish team. And then the second part will be finish top 3. And that's kind of why I made the call to not, like, I got selected out of Ireland. But in order to be like the best in the world, like I just know the physical shape that I'd have to be in, and you need to be competing regularly on the circuit and have access to sparring partners and gyms and that sort of stuff. So that's why I'm not going to be at it. But that was the qualification process.
Yeah. So just before we get onto that, so the injury you had, it was initially just a an ankle injury that was going to keep you out for a few weeks, but then it kind of did it like escalate from there in terms of there was an MRI scan you had to go into the middle of that or something, that, and it kind of ended up being a lot worse than you initially thought. And this was, like you said, in the start of 2020.
Yeah, so this was I was probably even going back to 2019 now. I'd come back from the European Championships, and this is where they thought I broke my arm. But anyway, it turns out that wasn't broken. But I woke up to go back training one day and I couldn't get out of bed. I was like, I couldn't stand on my leg. So I went to the hospital with it, and they scanned it, or they just did the x-ray on it, and they were like, oh, we think you have like a stress fracture. And I was like, grand, that's fine. I'll just, stress fractures are nothing. Like, you'll be out for a few weeks and you'll be, well, in my mind, it wasn't anything major. And then they just said, we better send you for an MRI, just like to be on the safe side. So I went for the MRI, and then the doctor rang me and he was like, yeah, we need you to come in. And I probably should have figured out then, like, that he's not giving me any results. He's not telling me you're grand. There's no letter in the post saying MRI is fine, just wait a few weeks. But I still didn't cop on. And then when I got in there, he was like, this isn't good. Like, your ankle has just been eaten alive. So I got like this, that all the cartilage had worn away in it. It's kind of related to Crohn's disease. So all my joints are affected as well. And it had basically eaten away all the bone, and all the cartilage and all the ligaments had been destroyed. So I had to take bone out of my knee and transfer it down to the ankle, had the ligament surgically repaired, and then put in a lot of pins into the ankle. So that was it. So
yeah. And how did you find, because you were you making your way back to training? You'd obviously got yourself fit, and then did you decide then, on the basis of that injury, as well as knowing the amount of work, that maybe Tokyo 2021 wasn't the best idea, or for want of a better description?
Yeah, so, well, it wasn't just on that one. So then after about 6 months, that ankle still wasn't healing properly. I was in pain all the time, and then went for another scan on it, and it had whatever the growth was that was causing all the problems that needs to be cleared away again. Basically, there was more of it there. So I had a smaller operation on it then last summer, and I was fine. Like, I'd come back after that, but then it was just like, then Christmas time they shut down gyms, and we don't get access to Sport Ireland to their gym facilities. Which is really frustrating, because I see it on Instagram every day and it's empty. There's like one athlete in it. But anyway, that's a rant for another day.
Or later on in the interview, maybe.
Yeah. So so the gym's all closed. Like, our coaches were doing their best to like get us prepared, but like, I just know myself that when I was at the best in the world in kickboxing, I was training every day. I was competing at least once a month. You just know, like, I think any athlete knows the physical shape that they need to be in to be competitive. And a couple of weeks ago then, last month, I just like, what am I doing? Like, I'm literally going here to get the tracksuit and just show up and just say, oh, I went to Olympic qualification event. Like, I don't think I'd get annihilated, because like, I wouldn't, but I just know I wouldn't win, and I only wanted to go to win. So.
How difficult a decision was that when you had to make the announcement? It was only a few weeks ago as well.
Yeah, it was kind of like, it was hard, but then it was also just like, I knew myself what I was doing this for. Like, as in, I had only ever switched sports to be the best at this sport. And maybe that, it's not to say that anybody else who just wants to represent their country and doesn't care about where they finished. Like, I'm not trying to disrespect anyone else's like goals or whatever, but that was my goal. And so it wasn't really that difficult, because even if I'd stuck it out and there was other things too. There was the injury. There was just like, I just wanted, my life is on hold for this as well, like, and age and all sorts of things. So like, it wasn't that difficult, because I just knew that even if I stuck it out, there was just no way I was going to qualify. Like, it would have taken a miracle. So yeah, it was like difficult, because it's like the end of a whole era, I guess, but not really. Like, I knew it was the right decision.
Yeah, and just on maybe like the year delay, like, obviously people probably don't realize a lot of Olympic athletes have had to literally put their life on hold for a whole year. Like, I know it seems like we're all having to do that in just normal life, but I guess for Olympians in particular, like, they've had to, and people looking to qualify for events like karate, for example, have had to literally, it's as if it's 2020 this year for them. Like,
yeah, I think sometimes, I think like, when I say that, I sound really entitled, because like a lot of elite athletes can come across that way, that, you know, that the world is kind of about us or whatever. But like, I do think everybody has suffered. Like, I'm not trying to say my life has been hit any particularly worse, but I just found it particularly difficult because, like, you're not it's grand if you're funded. Like, if I was paid by Sport Ireland to wait another year, happy days, like, your bills are paid. But you're not. That's not the scenario for most athletes. It's like an expensive sport because you're constantly training, you're paying for your injuries, you like physio cover, like none of that is covered by the governing body, and then you have to work as well. So, like, it's financially, it's really difficult to wait another year to try and qualify for the Olympics, and you get no help. Like, there's zero help or support from the Irish sports system unless you're in a little clique of sports. But you know, there's a whole pile of us that don't get any support at all. So that was one of the most difficult parts of it, I found. And you're kind of pausing your life. Do you know what I mean? It's, I don't know. Like, not that you can do anything anyway during the pandemic. I think everybody's going through that, but that was the worst part.
Yeah, like I remember talking to like late Jerry Kieran, and we had him on like last summer, and he was saying like the best athletes get well looked after from Sport Ireland, but is it maybe not trickle down enough to maybe give other Irish athletes, you know, potentially competing in the Olympics, and particularly given the pandemic heading into Tokyo 2021, not just karate but in a wide range of sports? Is there enough support from Sport Ireland overall, or how does it work in terms of grants, or is there any grants for any fighter competing in karate, for example?
Look, I'd even add to what he said, because it's not even a case that the best athletes get supported. The best athletes in certain sports get support. So you can be the best athlete in particularly in martial arts, and you'll get nothing. Like, Sport Ireland are atrocious. They should be ashamed of themselves. Like, and I don't even mind saying that, because when it comes to high performance, they haven't a clue. They don't know what they're doing. They've got millions of euros to spend, and they just do the same thing year in, year out. Like, it's just so frustrating. Like, I've been writing to them, to ministers for sport, since I was probably 15. Like, that's like a long time ago. And like, it wasn't just me, like, it was my mum, and they just fob you off all the time. Like, so they don't have any intentions of supporting athletes or supporting any new sports or trying to improve Irish sport and performance on the international level. So, like, unless there's an uproar about something in the media where it could affect ministers' votes or their seats at elections, then something might happen about it. But especially in the more disadvantaged sports as well, and maybe I'm wrong in this, but like, I've always competed in martial arts, and it's typically a sport for kind of disadvantaged areas, and they just don't care about us. They never will. Like, I've come to accept that now. I'll die of shock if they start supporting martial arts, but like, obviously it would be great news, but they're terrible. And compared to international levels, some of it is resources. They don't have the resources other sports have, but they certainly could do better with the resources they have if they actually were open to different ideas.
Well, I was just going to ask you about the international comparisons, like when you brought it up. So, like, what are other countries doing better in terms of supporting sports like, you know, mixed martial arts, compared to, say, Ireland, for example, where it just seems that we're not. You're right in what you're saying. Like, I haven't heard too much in the media about it. I don't think there's the will there, which is probably the first problem, I guess, in this country.
Yeah, I'm not, like, I guess there's other in international or different countries that don't do it great either. And there's, like, you can't compare Ireland to, like, for example, like Team GB, where they have just millions and millions of money to spend in it. But the biggest, sorry.
No, just on that, it's tough in general to find any comparisons with Ireland, like in any sport. So that's always like a tough starting point, isn't it, to try and find the perfect a country doing it the same as us, if that makes sense. So that's always like a tough start. Yeah,
but like, I know that countries that I've competed against, if you even take karate, for example, like, if you look at the French karate system, long before the Tokyo announcement happened, they were looking ahead and identifying potential sports that will make the cut for games, and they were funding them, knowing that in 8 years, in 4 years, these sports are going to be potential medal sports. And then they also, other countries don't put the Olympics as the god of sport, as in they put more emphasis on all sports. So like when I was kickboxing, there was never talk of it being in the Olympics, like realistically, but I was competing against athletes in nations that were constantly getting funded. So their governments kind of rewarded them, maybe not at the same level as winning an Olympic gold medal, but I was competing against Turkish athletes, and if they got a bronze medal at the World Championships, they were coming home with thousands. And like I was beating them and getting gold medals and getting like nothing, like I was minus money coming home. Yeah, so that's what you're up against. But like my biggest issue is that there's just not equality of opportunity, and I can understand there's not maybe enough to go around, but there's no like clear process. So for example, like they say, well, they don't say anything. That's the problem. So if I wanted to start off in a sport and get funding, I ask Sport Ireland, well, how do I do it? And they can't give an answer. So they can't say, well, we're going to discriminate against this sport, or we're going to do this, or you have to do this, and this, and then you'll get funded. They just make it up as they go along, and nobody asks the question. So that's my biggest issue. It's if I didn't perform and they had a very clear, fair process of like allocating funding on that, I'd say that's fine. But they don't. They just make it up. So you like I was like winning everything in my sport, and they're still telling me I'm not high performance. Like, what do you have to do to be high performance in there? And they won't tell me why. You're just like, yeah, we're not. You're just not good.
So when you were winning stuff, like what tell me about a bit, maybe go back a little bit on the kickboxing, and a kind of related point. So what sort of like events were you winning, and what you weren't getting any support then from Sport Ireland, despite not only like winning those events, but actually requesting or asking for help or support?
Yeah. So I won senior European championships. I won, and if we look at there's again in kickboxing, there's loads of different like world bodies, but if I just focus on the one that's recognized by the Olympics, so like the highest level, I was winning medals at every world championship, senior world championships. I won, I think, 11 World Cup gold medals. I've lost count of the silver and bronze medals I've won. And that's been I won my first major medal in 2001, 2002, and I won my last one in 2017.
That's amazing. 15 years span there.
Yeah, and that's just like that. Well, no,
that's just kickboxing.
No, but that's like I didn't do that well as well in karate, but like I just don't see how you can tell somebody they're not high performance after that. And it wasn't just me. Like there was people around me that were winning every bit as much as me. We were a good team. Yeah,
and tell me a little bit about performing at such a high level, and the amount of training involved that you would be like used to. So obviously you've brought that through with your kickboxing, and then on to karate. Like, how often have you been training, say from the early 2000s all the way to now? Is it like a 4 or 5 times a week? Is it every day, or how do you go about like planning your training? And are you working with a team, or how do you kind of get the motivation almost to do all that training?
I never struggled with motivation for training. I just loved it. Like I was probably hooked on it. Definitely not like in the earlier days anyway. So when I started initially, I was probably training 4 or 5 times a week when I was still in school. And it wasn't until I got to senior level that I realized, oh, hang on, this is way harder. I'm going to need to train hard. So I trained 6 days a week. Most of those days would be twice a day. And I trained before work, after work. There was like a group of maybe 8 or 10 of us, and we literally used to just kick lumps out of each other. And that just made us better and better. I know this sounds really bad, but we were really competitive. Probably not even in a healthy way. Like everybody was trying to like be better than the next person, which makes you better, but also like it's really can be a toxic environment to be in. But so that's how we trained 6 days a week. Every day we trained together. We trained really hard. And I guess that's kind of how we got a bit of success then.
Yeah, so you were working full time at the time, and then sometimes you would be doing a session before work, like you said, and then after work, and then that weekend or 5 weekends from then you'd be competing at a world championship.
Yeah, so I wouldn't do that all year round. Like I would train most evenings all year round, but I wouldn't have done because I used to hate getting up and do the early morning sessions. Like I'd be crying, the alarm would go off at like 5. But yeah, we'd maybe like 6 to 8 weeks before every competition, like the big competitions, not like the Like the smaller ones we didn't train that hard for, but like the World Cups or the World Championships, we train for about 6 to 8 weeks out, and we train at that kind of high level, because I had to do that as well to get my weight down, and like it was all, you're trying to cut weight as well as do all that. So yeah.
Yeah, and how was it like working? You said there was a few you guys. Were you all in like a similar boat, as in you were competing maybe at the same events under different weight classes, be it male, female, or was there like a bit of a team like you mentioned there?
Yeah, so like we would have all trained together, and as much as it was very competitive, like we had great laughs. Like, so there would have been a good lot of us all training together. Everybody wanting to kind of, I guess, win their division. So yeah, we train as a team really. Like, and we used to all spar together. Like we used to spar the guys as well, especially ones that be within our weight category. And that, to me, that I always credit that with making me that bit better. Like it's hard sparring the guys, like, so when you're sparring them all the time, and then you go out and spar people a bit lighter than you in your own category, it just makes it that bit easier. But yeah, so we all trained together. It was good. Bit of a laugh, I think, as well.
Yeah, and then so tell me how you managed to do all that, and then you were obviously diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Would maybe like tell the listeners a little bit about those that don't know too much about it, because I know I read somewhere that I think it was like, correct me if I'm wrong here on the stat, there's like 40,000 people in Ireland a year or something like that are affected by Crohn's disease.
Yeah, I don't know the exact stats, but that sounds about right. I think I got diagnosed, I think, was it 2014? Yeah, it's about that now. But I was sick for years. Like I was really stupid with my health. Like I never did anytime I'd get sick, I would just think, oh, this is just a bug. It'll last for a couple of days and it'll go away. And I did that for like 10 years and just got progressively worse. So like Crohn's disease is just that's not a very attractive disease. When I first got diagnosed, it's like, nobody's going to know about this. I'm not talking about it. Like, you're talking about your bowels, like, basically. So getting sick all the time, and then it affects, like, for some people, it affects their joints. So you can get arthritis in your joints, which I've been lucky enough to have, which is great. So all of those things, like, just progressively got really, really bad. I had loads of like ulcers in my stomach. And then eventually I just collapsed because I just kept pushing myself through it. And that's when I got diagnosed. So it's a really hard, it's not a very nice disease to have, but it's manageable. Like, you can take, like, I take medication now to keep it under control. So it's like, once you have it managed, it's not too bad. But yeah, it doesn't go away. So you're stuck with it forever. So it's, unless they find a cure. So hopefully they will. But yeah, no, I have it. I'm stuck with it pretty much forever now.
Yeah, it must have been so tough for you, like when you were getting sick and then still having to train, not knowing what it was, I guess, was probably more worrying for you than, I suppose, than finding out what it was.
Yeah, I think it was looking back, it was madness, because I don't know how I trained through it, because it was only when I got better that I realized how sick I was, because I felt brilliant and I was like, hang on, is this just what it feels like to be healthy? This is great. But like, I'd get sick before, like, national championship finals or world championship. I remember being in the semi-final of a world championships, I think it was 2013. And like, I was in great form up until that point, and I was so sick the night before. Like, I don't know how I even competed. I got bashed, like, in the semi-finals, absolutely, like, really badly beaten. But it was because I was so sick and I had no clue what happened. And I just put it down. I thought maybe I choked, or I got so nervous that I got sick. But now, looking back, like, I know it was Crohn's disease. But so yeah, I should have probably got it sorted sooner, and I might have won a few more medals. But what can you do?
And I know you've tried to raise a lot of awareness for it, because, and like you mentioned, there's still not a cure for the disease. That while it's manageable, they're still looking for a cure for the disease. Yeah,
there's I don't think there's any. Well, maybe there is, like, going to be a cure soon, but it doesn't look like there is. But one of the things that happened to me was, like, not long after I got diagnosed. I think it was 2014, because I was due to have a training session or a fight off for the national team for the European Championships, and I couldn't go because I was in hospital. Like, I was really sick, and I wrote a letter to like the governing body, like asking for just like a couple of weeks to get better and like just to understand. And they just kicked me off the team because they thought I was too lazy to. Yeah, so they didn't even tell me. Like I found out on Facebook that somebody else had got my place on the team for the European Championships, and like I was so mad, like I was fuming, as well as being really like I was on like a morphine drip at the time, so I was out of it, but I was also like really mad. So that was kind of the turning point why I did the raising the awareness on it, because I just thought, one, I was mad at them, but actually the other part of it was they just didn't understand how serious like the Crohn's disease is, because you don't look sick. Like a lot of the time you just look grand and you could be really sick. So that was when I first kind of started speaking about it, because I found that loads of other people as well feel like a little bit of stigma around it. So that was why I did that.
And is that becoming better? Like, because I know like 2014 doesn't sound long away ago, but it was like 7 years ago, I guess. Is there, like, I know I've become aware of it over the last year or two from high profile people raising awareness about it. Is that becoming more prevalent, do you find, or is there still a little bit of stigma attached to it?
I think it's got better. Like it's definitely got better for me anyway. And I just personally, I find just telling people, not that I like, it's not like the first thing I tell people when I meet them, but I think just being open about it, people can be a little bit more understanding of it. But yeah, it's definitely got better. I don't think people are maybe they're grossed out by it, but they don't say it to my face anymore. Because when I first used to say it, people are like, oh, don't tell me that. We don't want to talk about that. But it's definitely, yeah, it's got a bit better. And I think there's the Irish Society of Crohn's and Colitis. They've done a pretty good job on doing like awareness, I guess, or raising awareness on it. So I hope it's got better for everybody, but I've definitely felt it's been better for me anyway.
You were diagnosed in 2014, but you were still not only competing in kickboxing, then through it all, you still managed to change sport completely to karate and then compete at a very high level there. So it's really, you were still managing to train and fight and compete. Which just shows that you're able to manage it when you're able to manage it, and you're still able to put in all that hard training, like you mentioned, 5 or 6 times a week. So
yeah, like it didn't take me. It took me about a year, the gutsy of a year, to kind of get it back under control and get the right medication that worked to keep it manageable. So yeah, I was able to do it. Now I know some people get annoyed at me. Some people with Crohn's disease get annoyed at me. They're like, "Oh, she's not sick enough. Like she's too positive," and you just can't keep everyone happy. But I know it's not that easy for everybody. So some people that have IBD, or it's like Crohn's or colitis. They, no matter what they do, they try everything that they're told to do, all the medication, everything, and they don't maybe ever get to the level where they can do a lot of exercise or whatever. So I know in one way I'm kind of lucky, but I do think for the most part, it shouldn't hold you back too much. Like there's a lot of things you can do with it once you have it managed properly. So yeah.
And I know you stepped away from like the Olympic qualifying. Are you still training, or what are you are you still like playing karate, for competing, or like how does your like kind of week go in terms of, are you still doing a bit of training, or what sort of things you've been doing?
So for the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've done nothing, like only in.
Well, I just got to interrupt you saying that's a well-deserved break, I think.
Well, I don't know. I'm inhaling food as well, so I need to calm down. But no, I don't intend to compete again. Like this was always going to be the last year anyway. So, I'll definitely play sports when the gyms open back up. I'll be back in there. I want to do surfing. Like I've grown up beside the beach forever, and I've never surfed. So. And I think that's in the Paris 2024 games. So who knows?
Just going to say, yeah.
Yeah. No. But yeah, I'd like to try a different sport, something like totally different and not be competitive. I don't know if that's possible for me, but yeah, I'd like to do that. But definitely never competitive international sport again. No way. Too old.
I can see you getting into surfing and then getting that competitive juice flowing, and then who knows? Like,
yeah, well, hopefully not.
Tell us a little bit about Global Athletes, because I understand you're the co-founder there. You set it up.
Well, I'm one of a number of athletes that have kind of we all just came together to set this up or to get it started. Yeah, it's something that I'm really proud to be involved in. And like we're just a group of athletes that have just decided that we're going to try and do something to advocate for athlete rights. And better conditions for athletes in the Olympic and Paralympic movement. So that's kind of it started in 2019, and we've kind of been up and running. We have a director general and a program manager as well, and then we're part of the startup group. So I think we're making a bit of a difference. We've done some like research on I suppose just on the lack of money for athletes and how much money the Olympic movement take in. So like they take in billions. They're still set up as a non-profit, but they take in billions per cycle, and athletes get about like it's embarrassing how much they get. Like it's really, really small. So we've done a bit of research on that, and then we've kind of advocated for better rights around anti-doping, and just like even with the Olympics now, just to make sure athletes are, I guess, part of decision making, because athletes don't make any decisions, even though they pretty much affect every athlete. It's like they're just dictated to our athletes ourselves. Like we're told what and when, and like everything that we can do is just told us, and we just have to shut up and perform and do what we're told. And that's just never been okay with me. And like it was part of elite sport for me all the time, like for 20 plus years. And so now I've just had enough of that. And I think the people that are on the group with me are kind of the same. So we're just trying to do our best, like to get athletes more decision-making power, really.
And is it, who set it up then? Was it was it some Irish athletes, some worldwide athletes, or was this?
Yeah, so no, I'm the only Irish athlete on it.
Oh, brilliant.
So, yeah, there's Callum, he's a Scottish cyclist. He's the Olympic champion since Rio. And Ali Jawad, he's a British athlete in the Paralympics. Then there's Noah, who's a US, I think it's cross-country skiing, his winter sport. And yeah, then there's our director general, he's the Rob Keeler. He's the former assistant or deputy director general at WADA. He's going to kill me if I get that wrong. And then we have program manager Bree as well. Yeah, so there's just that's a group of us. So we're all dotted like from US, Europe, and I'm the only Irish one in there. So.
It's and it sounds like there's a lot of sports and different like Olympics and Paralympics covered, like, because I think a lot of people would look at, like, obviously, like lazy example, but if you take like the Premier League footballers, the amount of money they're earning, and because the clubs are earning so much money, the players' agents have managed to get them a good proportion, a fair proportion of what they're earning for their clubs. So it's all relative. Whereas if the Olympics are earning, on a similar case every 4 years, and the athletes aren't getting well paid or well rewarded, I think a lot of people wouldn't be happy by that. But it doesn't seem to, like, it's great that you guys have set this up, and I think it's probably like maybe a first step in terms of getting athletes right, because I think there would be a lot of willpower from the wider public when they watch the Olympics every 4 years, that they'd hope that these athletes are well looked after, relative and proportionate to what the Olympics are earning themselves. Like you mentioned, it's a non-profit.
Yeah, so like I think a lot of people don't get that most Olympic athletes come home from the Olympics completely broke and probably in like thousands and thousands of debt. So like if you take your typical Olympic Games, you're talking about 10,000, maybe 11,000 athletes that compete. And like there's probably, you could count in one hand the names that you'd know. And those guys, there are people that are like making quite a good bit of money, but I mean, it's tiny, like it's so minimal. And it's not the Olympics that are paying them. It's brands or sponsors or, endorsements, or their governments. Like some countries do really good medal bonuses, but they're like the minority. Most athletes come back with absolutely nothing, and they've probably put a lifetime of savings into even training to get to the Olympic Games. And then you have the Olympics, and they're taking in $6 billion per cycle. And their IOC members are on hundreds of dollars a day per DMs to go and sit in 5-star hotels and drink champagne and be whizzed around in like limousines or whatever it is they do at the Olympic Games. And then the athletes just go and perform but get nothing. And we just don't think that's fair, especially when there's so much money. Now, the Olympics try and tell us that money is all filtered back down into the athletes, but it doesn't. Like, I mean, we've seen so many scandals in the Olympics. There's been loads, but and that's the money that we're talking about the $6 billion that we can see in a cycle. That's the money that they show us. Like, there's probably a good chance there's more money filtering through all their accounts. We don't always see everything, So yeah, so that's what I think a lot of people don't always see, that the athletes get nothing, but yet without the game or without the athletes, there is no games. And I think athletes need to they're starting to wake up to realize that they have a lot of power and potentially they can change the way the sport is run. Because I think it's not even that we're trying to say that, oh, you know, we want to take over and we want the Olympic guys to go. We're just saying like it'll be better for everybody if it's a more kind of fair, equitable like model business. It should be a business model.
And like even, you don't have to look too far here in Ireland for scandals like 2016 in Rio, and then obviously you have John Delaney in Irish, you know, football kind of suggests, reading between the lines, that it's not well. The Irish Olympic Council wouldn't be too well. You know, maybe ran in the past, and that, you know, that legacy is kind of leading on to now where, like you mentioned, non-Olympic sports and Olympic sports athletes aren't being funded properly here in Ireland.
No, and you know, it's like we've had those scandals, and they're the ones that we know about. You know, I wouldn't be shocked if there's more that we don't know about in other sports. And you'd almost like, this part of me almost feels sorry for the FAI now that they get such a bad rap, when probably there's loads of other sports every bit as bad, but they're just not in the public light or whatever. But anyway, yeah, in Ireland, like athletes they have no rights. There's no athlete commissions. There's no independent, like the GAA have the GPA and the women's GPA, which is brilliant. But there needs to be something like that in other sports. And like even the athletes that Sport Ireland fund, they're not seen as employees. So they have no rights. Like they have no, like the rights that all their staff would have. So if you're an athlete and you're on the top level of funding, I think it's 40 grand a year, you still have no employee benefits or rights, which is weird. Like, what are they giving you the money for? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Though they should be treated as employees, and they should be represented. They're not represented on any of the committees. Any of the athletes that are selected for kind of the athlete role are selected by the organisation, which isn't really proper athlete representation. Like, if you're going to be representing athletes, the athletes should be selecting you to represent them, not the organisations. So yeah, Ireland's pretty far behind, but things might change. Hopefully it'll change.
Yeah, and just to touch on those grants, so they're like it's the Irish Sports Council grants, isn't it? And they're available on the website every year, and they're basically full public domain and stuff like that. So like the 40 grand, like you mentioned, would be, I'm not sure about this year's one, but like for example, at the top of my head, I know like Ciara McGee will be on that, and maybe a few other of those kind of high profile athletes. And it kind of, there's a few sections of it, isn't it? There's like half of that, and then maybe 10,000 is there.
Yeah, there's 3 different levels there. Yeah, I think I'm not exactly sure of the figures. But yeah, they're like 20 grand, maybe 10, 12 grand for the third one. But yeah, like you just mentioned that, and it reminded me of something. So one of the things that Sport Ireland did last year, I think, was they brought in maternity leave. But yet so if maternity leave is for staff, like it's for employees. So why not give them a full complement of employee rights? Why not treat them as employees? But they don't. So like they can just cut your contract and funding and off you go, and then you have nothing. So when athletes retire, even the ones that are looked after in the system, once they're out of it, it's like good luck, see you later, and they have to start over from scratch. So yeah, it's not ideal. Like it's and they're still like it's not bad. Like I wouldn't be complaining if I was that much if I was one of the athletes that was a bit supported. Like, you know, there's still athletes in far worse positions, but even the ones that are well supported, it's still not great.
And then just like, because you mentioned that the employee kind of thing, like I guess you could have security and maybe get 3 or 4 year deals. Am I right in saying, is this every year? Like, is it a case that if you're not performing, you're not going to get the grant next year? Or is there, like, would the best athletes get maybe a 3 or 4 year guarantee on that 40K? Or?
Well, this is something that they don't actually tell everyone, but there has been a few deals done for certain athletes to keep them in the sport for an Olympic cycle, but that isn't very transparent. We don't see that publicly, but I know for a fact that there has been a couple of athletes that have got that deal. I think that's great. Like, I'm not.
Yeah, that's the right thing, but it should be transparent.
It should be transparent. There should be the same opportunity for every athlete to get that, but some athletes will be. I think the last time they did a 2-year guarantee for funding for athletes. But there's good and bad to that. It just means then that nobody new, I think, can come in during that 2-year period. Like if somebody does really well, but it should be just the same way that if you're in any other job, I guess, that like there's provisions, and then if you're transitioning away from sport, like it's just so cutthroat. Like you just don't have that in any other industry. Or maybe if it is, like at least with professional football, you're getting well paid for it. Like you have a few million in the bank, so you're not too worried if like your salary stops at the end of the year.
Mm. Yeah, and maybe tell me then a little bit about, you're an ambassador for Equity Sport.
Oh yeah, so they're a really cool charity. So they're based they're based. It's a global charity, but their main base is in the UK, and they aim to basically just bring about equality of opportunity and inclusion in sport. But they focus mainly kind of in some African nations, and then they just asked me to come on board as an ambassador to maybe promote the work that they're doing, and I kind of felt like our values were similarly aligned. So yeah, I was happy to jump on board. So they do great work. I'm really happy to be involved with them.
Because I can follow you on Twitter. You tweet a lot about female, correct me if I'm wrong here, female like participation in sport, and maybe a little bit of the rights. Or do you want to talk a little bit about that and some things that you think are potentially not right that should be fixed, maybe closer to home or worldwide in terms of maybe female sport?
Yeah, God, my Twitter feed is like just I go on rants on Twitter, so
it's the best place for rants, to be fair. So
yeah, well, I try not to be, I don't ever like be trolling people or like slanderous or anything, but I think some things need to be said in sport, and I just say it. But yeah, I've kind of given up on Irish sport, to be honest. I've spent the last 20 plus years trying to make a difference, and I think the biggest failure of my career has been that I've made no difference. Like all my giving out and all the abuse I've suffered from people in Irish sport, and it's literally changed nothing. But in general,
so just on that, so if you were starting your kickboxing career today from maybe 2001, so it's 2021, do you think it's pretty much the same as it was 20 years ago, or that it's still that hard to get, like, for example, funding and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's the exact same. Nothing's improved. Yeah, zero. Yeah, and I'm being genuine about that. Like I know people have asked me that before, and I've said the same, and they say, "Oh, come on! Like things have definitely got better." It might have got better for some sports. It's not got better for the sports I've been involved in. Like there's still no funding available at all. Nothing. And like I don't want to blame it all on Sport Ireland, because you have to look at the governing bodies. Like surely they have to start questioning how good they are at running an organization if in 20 years they've not developed at all. So part of it falls on to the people that are running the sport as well. But yeah, no, nothing has really got better, and certainly that I can see. The only thing that got better in kickboxing was our performance, I guess, when we won more medals over that time. So that was it. I forget what else I was saying.
No, sorry, I kind of interrupted you when you're in the middle of flow of maybe some of the female, and I was conscious as you were talking there that I interrupted your flow there. A little bit of maybe on female sport and women in sport in general. And you kind of said you'd given up on Irish sport. What kind of problems are there outside of what we talked about in other sports maybe? And is there anything that the governing body should do, or maybe people should do in general, to maybe like in 5-10 years time that we're not having the same problems?
I genuinely believe the only way things can get better is if people speak up about things, and that isn't easy to do. And I felt the brunt of doing that, so I know why people are afraid to do it, because I've missed out on selection for being a difficult athlete, or that's what I was told. But some of the things that, like in 20 plus years, never having access to a changing room, but the guys have a changing room, never having access to showers. And these are just small stuff in Irish sport. Like I know on a global scale, there's some worse off countries where it's not that bad, and I sound like just a spoiled brat because I don't have a shower after training. But you still, like, there's just the facilities are really bad, and then you do complain about it and you're difficult. Like that's just how you're labelled. But I think the only way, because governing bodies certainly the governing bodies that I've been involved in, they're too busy trying to be friends with Sport Ireland. And they just don't bat for the athletes. Basically, they are just so content with trying to pick up the scraps that are thrown at them from Sport Ireland that they never want to do anything different or cause a fuss or cause a scene. And so then they don't make any progression. But I think athletes are afraid to say something because it'll look, they'll get in trouble, and they will get in trouble. You probably will get a hard time, but I think the only way things are going to change is that if everybody gets to the point where they've just had enough and they say, hang on, this isn't good enough anymore. We're all coming together and we're all saying this, we want better for our sport and for our athletes. So if that happens, I'd be delighted, but it hasn't happened in the last 20 years and I'm not too confident.
Yeah, should there be because obviously if you take, like players or athletes representations, and you mentioned before that organizations are putting their athletes forward as opposed to maybe athletes representatives. Is there enough athlete representative bodies in Ireland? Is there any athlete representative bodies? I know there's the PFAI, for example, look after, I don't think they do a particularly good job now myself, but is there a case to be made maybe covering all sports in an athlete body, or what? Is there any kind of solution like that could maybe improve things ever so slightly?
Yeah, I think that is the way forward. And I think the important thing is that it's independent athlete representation. So at the minute, with the professional sports like rugby, soccer, I know GAA isn't professional, but they're well organised and they're well funded. And they all have some form of athlete representation. The Olympic Federation of Ireland has an athlete committee, and I need to be really clear in this. There's some brilliant people on that, but they're not representing athletes. They are representing the organisation. They're selected and they're funded directly by the Olympic Federation of Ireland. So they have to, their hands are tied as to what they can do, because they have to remember where their bread's buttered. They get funded by the Olympic Federation, and if they start rocking the boat too much, that funding's going to stop. Let's be honest, that's exactly what happens. So there needs to be independent representation where athletes, they organize themselves and they come together. And if that's individual sports, that's great. I don't know what the best way to do it is, but it needs to be people that are passionate about it, that want to do better for the sport, that understand how to represent athletes. And then you need funding, you need independent funding. That's really hard to find. But I think the biggest danger that we have here in Ireland is that, and that's happening everywhere, is that you have these athlete commissions that are set up by the organisations, and then they're telling the media organisations, oh, we have athlete voice, we have the athlete representations, and media organisations are buying it. I turned on a news channel, let's just say, I won't name it, and they have the athlete representative, which is the handpicked person by the Olympic Federation representing athletes. So that person's not going to speak properly, on what needs to be said to really represent athletes. So there's a danger there that we're all being fooled to think that athletes are well represented, but it doesn't count, in my opinion, when the presidents of these federations who want to keep things the same are then handpicking these athletes and then saying, that's your box ticked, these are athlete representatives, and that's all you're getting.
It sounds like politics, and we need to get an independent, like you said. But look, hopefully, there will be some changes. That one final question I want to ask you about. You recently started with your presenter of iScore on iRadio. Tell us a little bit about how that came about and how much you're enjoying it so far.
It was very random how it came about, but I love it. I was looking for a new challenge. It was last year. And I seen iRadio were looking for a presenter of a sports show. And I've done a couple of interviews on the radio. I've never been on radio. I never was at it. I've never done anything to do with this. So I rang the station and they said, yeah, send in a demo. I said, fine, yeah, of course I'll send in a demo. And I hung up the phone. I went and I Googled what's a radio demo. So I got out my phone and started pretending to be a presenter into the phone, and I sent it off, and it was terrible. It was really bad. But anyway, they asked me then to come down and do some recording stuff in the studio. This was obviously before the pandemic. And then, so that's kind of how it started. So I was totally winging it. I still am, but I think I'm enjoying it. They haven't sacked me yet, so we'll see how it's going. But yeah, it's a good crack. I love sport, and I think that's the thing that that I knew a lot about going into it, and then I just kind of learned other bits. I got a lot of training, and my bosses there probably have had their heads melted with me asking questions. But yeah, so that's what I do on the weekends. So all good.
Very good, very good. And then for those that are listening, how can they keep up to date with you? What's your social media? And then we'll kind of put it in the description as well.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. The both usernames are at Caradh O'Donovan. Instagram's a little bit of a happier place. Sometimes Twitter has a few rants, so apologies.
Yeah, just all continuation and stuff we talked about here. But listen, Cara, thanks a million for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Oh no, thanks a million for having me.
And for those listening, at Tackling Sport, get us on social media, and you can subscribe on the bottom right here on YouTube. But that's it. And thanks for listening. Until next time on the show.